I'll get there.
Okay.
No,
Think of cyberspace as a social petri dish.
no,
Oh, there you go.
number 4.
Okay, we ready? Well, I'm just going to
Sure. Sure. Did you say it's number 4?
I thought so, but that's not what I see as number 4.
I've got that as a 7-minute chunk. I'm just going to mute myself and play.
Now,
everybody, Tatiana!
Hey. Oh, hi, everybody.
Oh, so
good
nice
to see you.
Face. Oh, full heart.
Hello.
Full heart.
Welcome everyone who's joining. It's really good to see you. Good to see your faces, those of you who have your cameras on. So I'm just going to introduce this space, especially for those of you who haven't experienced it before. So this community radio idea is about just giving a space for people in and around the CCRI community to connect in quite an informal way, just because we aren't seeing each other and aren't having the opportunities to meet. And so it's not about making presentations, it's just really about getting the background chat and seeing what's going on for people. And so but one of the things that I've been engaged with, and some of the others here have been Dan and Annette's project, the massive micro sense making project. So that's been that's going to be the topic today, and Dan and Annette are joining us, and welcome. There's so much to say about the project that I'm not going to have any other elements today. I think we can just sort of launch in and talk about what's been happening and what's coming up. So hi, both of you.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So should we go ahead and just introduce ourselves and carry on? Do you think give a little introduction, or do you have some questions?
I don't think we've met, but I've met you through the project, and I can see that you've been researching digital life right back since the 90s. So you're clearly the closest we get to a digital native researcher. But tell us more.
Yeah. Well, my name's Annette Markham, and I'm at RMIT University in Melbourne, and I'm situated in the Digital Ethnography Research Center here. And I'm also a professor of media and communication. And when I started the project or brainstormed the massive and micro sense making during times of global trauma idea, I was stuck in Denmark. I was working at Aarhus University, and I had just put all my things into a big boat to go over to Australia for my new job. And then the country's locked down, and I was stuck with 4 suitcases and nowhere to go. And so my house was gone and my new job was starting, and and I'm from the United States. I rented a car and immediately felt better, because I guess that's what we do. And I knew that I could have some freedom, at least, to sleep in my car and drive around Denmark. And I, through a friend of a friend of a friend, found a small beach cottage that happened to be deserted, and the beaches were completely deserted. And that's where I went for 2 weeks. And I ended up for the next 3 months, well, March, April, May, June, 4 months, hopping from Airbnb to Airbnb every 2 weeks or so. And I found myself very isolated and disrupted, as we all did. And I decided that I would kind of dive into that feeling because it was so profound and horrible, and we were all sort of, well, I thought, everybody around the planet is experiencing the same thing, or we're all in it together, right? The great illusion of early 2020, which was disrupted again by Black Lives Matter in April and May of the same year. So as I was sitting out in the middle of nowhere in the edges of Denmark, I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to write about this or think about this through a lens of autoethnography? And if I did that, wouldn't it be interesting to have some other people do that too? Because surely I can't be the only one who's feeling this. So I thought, well, yeah, I think I could start some sort of, sandbox for people to mess around in. And I thought, oh, I should have a compatriot. And I think I'll pick somebody from my new job who's also in the Digital Ethnography Research Center. And I had just met Dan, maybe a week or two before that. And um, he seemed very interesting and interested, and also had a level of enthusiasm that I kind of needed. I needed somebody who would not be afraid to jump off into the deep end and do something kind of crazy. So we had a conversation, and I don't know, Dan, maybe you'll have your own perspective on how this conversation went, but we decided to go for it and to kind of create this call for expressions of interest, to look at and explore our own lived experience through the lens of autoethnography as we were making sense of the pandemic, mostly on, but not exclusively on, and through digital media. And in places like Zoom, where we are now accustomed to sharing our pets.
Dan has brought
and just met Hazel.
Hazel.
Hello, Hazel. So that's how it started. And we sent out a call for expressions of interest, and we had over 150 people reply with very poignant abstracts. And not all of them were poignant, but they were all extraordinarily meaningful. And everybody was grappling with this in a pretty heavy way, a very meaningful way, in a way that wasn't at all superficial. And we met again, and we thought about selecting 12 for what we had planned to be a special issue of a journal. And we thought, no, we couldn't possibly just restrict it to just 12 people. First of all, how could we choose 12 out of 150 from 26 different countries? But second of all, why would we restrict it in that way? So we decided to transform it from kind of a writing exercise into an experiment that was more collaborative and would maybe involve something besides just writing a paper for a special issue of a journal about one's own analysis of the microscopic ways that the pandemic was changing us at the same time that it was this sort of massive and huge, invisible thing that was affecting the whole planet. There was just more than papers that could be written. So that's how we ended up with the next phase of the project, which was to do this sort of self-guided 21-day challenge of prompts for all 150 people to do. Anne, do you want to pick up from there and talk about some of that?
Yes, I do. So my memory of the encounter with Professor Markel was that Annette came to Melbourne just prior to our lockdown to meet people as the new incoming professor in our research center, in our Digital Ethnography Research Center. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was the same time that Rosie Bradati was there. And we had a big dinner at a restaurant and on our campus. And I went, and Stacy, my partner, who many of you know, Stacy Holman Jones, came with me. And all of a sudden, over this dinner table, Annette and Stacy embraced as old friends. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? And I realized, came to know that Stacy and Annette had shared some community around autoethnography history in the States prior to all of our current incarnations. So they were old friends, and that was a really nice connection. And also nice to find out that Annette had done some work in autoethnography. And as many of you know, I collaborate mostly with Stacy in autoethnographic ways in a range of different disciplinary areas. But I love that methodology, and I particularly love the cultural aspect of it, the ethnographic and cultural aspect of it. So when Annette suggested this idea, I was thrilled, and I thought it made a really nice bringing together of some threads. And yeah, everything that you've said already, Annette, was kind of astounding. The response, the intensity of the response of people, the emotion. I think for me, one of the main things that was so important about it being a 21-day shared experiment, not, you know, and that kind of taking precedence at some point over this original idea of like, oh, let's do a special issue. Wonder if 12 people are out there, you know. And I think, yeah, one of the things that overtook that for me was that it was unfolding, and of course it's still unfolding, but it seems to be unfolding in a different way, personally, interpersonally, you know, relationally, creative-relationally, and geopolitically. It's not the same everywhere in the world, COVID unfolding as we know, but it was also so different and so urgent, I suppose, and so unknown at that time. And some of the stuff I look back on, I just have a new book in production called Creative Agency, which uses a lot of the daily writings that I was doing as part of this experiment. And it was really like, you know, what's going on? Will we all be dead in a year? I don't know. Maybe it'll be a blip. And just thinking and writing about how all kind of pivotal historical moments and shared cultural crises are unknown, unintelligible while they're happening, and they start to cohere to some degree in hindsight. We start to think of the civil rights movement. It wasn't the civil rights movement when it was happening. It was a bunch of people getting on buses and going down south, or Me Too, or Black Lives Matter, you know, like all those kinds of examples we can think of. And so it feels really different now. And it was a kind of really beautiful community. And one of the things that I think Annette will talk about later is that community seems to want to continue, and that's amazing and extraordinary in a kind of neoliberal and particularly contracting academic sector. So I think a lot of that is down to Annette and ME, Mary Elizabeth Luca, our bring in later from Canada, a colleague of Annette's, who have done so much labor around the community making, the creative relational labor making of this. I think, Annette, you are better at technology than I am. You are better at all of the listservy kind of things than I was. I found all that quite overwhelming, but the work was, and I also just was kind of surprised because I thought people wouldn't really have the time, you know, it was an overwhelming time. And I thought, oh, people will pop in and then pop out or whatever. But you know what? They really were attached to that daily prompt, I think. And some of you are here. Hi, Dawn. Hi. And like I think you guys could speak as well. You folk could speak about your experience of it as well. So I got kind of overwhelmed with the technology side of it and the multiple platforms, which we could also talk about. But it was so beautiful and so intimate and trusting. That was really beautiful. And then also to try and attend to, I think in my work, I like to make play dates and experiences for people as a kind of hack to the university environment, the product-oriented atmosphere of the university. And for some reason, this amazing experiment was special to me because it managed to do both things. So we talked about sharing in a safe manner. We talked about sharing things that might not go any further. We talked about not sharing things when and how it didn't feel safe. Like we talked about all those things at the same time. And for me, that's probably unique, if not very rare at least. And then to have these outputs, which we'll talk about if there's time, you know, because we wanted to acknowledge that we are all beholden to these industrial structures we're operating within. So all of that was moving to me. And I think like many balls in the air at the same time, that was just extraordinary. I'll leave it there. Annette, I think you're going to say something.
It was very, I can just speak as a participant, seeing your call, that it was very, it felt very engaging. I'm not surprised at the intensity of the responses, but I can only imagine how it must have been for you to find 150 voices around the world, because moving into the project, that the sense of presence of other people sharing this experience made it feel more real and grounded. For me, sort of stuck in my own house and my own garden and moving between the house and the garden, but suddenly part of it was kind of really connecting through the domestic sphere and hearing how many other people also eat breakfast and lunch and dinner and do yoga and go for a walk around the block. There was something very grounding about hearing all of this and feeling how alike we are. And also it felt like coming into the project started by coming into presence. There was something was able to move, and like you said, it suddenly felt bigger than, or not bigger, it felt more than this is thinking about writing some papers about this. It felt like actually this is about coming into the experience together and finding a sense of presence.
Yeah, totally. I agree with that. And it's so great to hear your reflections. And I feel like in the stuff that people shared in whatever variety of platforms, like that was one of the things that was so comforting about it, was that people, I mean, that is one of the great things that this shift or adaptation or incorporation of technology in this way has made possible, right? So like these videos, and I did find your video, so we can share that if and when you would like to. You know, these videos, just as one of the prompts, that had collaborators from 4 different continents in some cases, you know, and it's like, when have we done that? I mean, sometimes after you have a very long career and well-developed networks and all the rest of it, but it was so beautiful to see people come together and, you know, not that I did this because I'm lazy, but, you know, get up at 3 a.m. to compile these things so they could all be synchronously together. And, you know, it was but we needed that, didn't we? We needed that at that time so desperately.
I did think that in some ways the technology was it was like the 13th fairy. It was the gift in this situation that we found ourselves in, is the fact that we have this technology, and that we were able to connect through it, if not in person. And it's been magical. And perhaps the multi-platform is part of that, creating a broader sensation.
I think that was well, no, I'm not going to say I think. That was a very careful deliberation for us to think about how would we facilitate this kind of environment, knowing that you have people in all the world's time zones and you don't want to privilege any particular time zone, and so you have to make things asynchronous. But you also don't want people to have only email passing back and forth. So we had to really think about what kind of technology would facilitate the kind of community we wanted to, the kind of community feeling we wanted to encourage, and the kind of collaboration that was possible, and yet not give over to only one platform. So that actually became quite a complicated decision for me. Because, well, I mean, I don't know how many of you study digital technologies, but I've spent my entire career looking at and thinking about how we do things online and through different kinds of platforms. And one of the most insidious and horrible of the platforms is Facebook, for various reasons that we could talk about. But it also happened to be the best place that we could do such a thing, because Facebook and no other platform has the kind of capacity that we wanted. We wanted to be able to share texts and visuals in a casual way and comment on them, because we knew that commenting and liking on posts would encourage people to continue posting, and it would build a conversation quicker than email would. But we also had a mailing list, and we didn't want people who don't use Facebook to be left out. So we also sent out the prompts by email only, or by email. And one of the most obvious things that happened was that the people who participated on Facebook had a very different experience than those who participated only on email, at least in the anecdotal kind of reporting that people have given to me. But it was Facebook where we could do the sharing of images and posts, but there were also the platforms of creating video together, right? So the kind of other idea of doing a combined, like sending video to each other and then adding things to a video, or adding words or adding sound, and then producing something to then present to the group was interesting. And I also think that using different kind of digital media made a difference as well. And actually what that means is not digital media, but different kinds of media for communicating. So some people who felt comfortable writing could write. Those who felt comfortable doing sketches or drawing or painting did only that, which I thought was extraordinary because I'm so writing oriented. But then I also found myself doing almost all photography during this time, with little hashtags attached, so snippet texts. So people could do different kinds of formats and genres of exploration. And that was partly to build the variety, but it was also a way for us to get people to do some of the reflections that, and practice some of the reflexive writing or thinking that happens as a matter of general practice in ethnography and autoethnography particularly.
Mm.
So I think that the platform decision was a really good one. It was not without it was not without political decision making, I will say that.
You had to think about it. Yes, yeah.
Definitely had to, but there was no other alternative to Facebook, really.
Mm.
Anyway, I wonder if people have questions, because there's so many things we could talk about, and um,
I wanted
I'd
to
be
ask,
curious if people have questions or comments.
well, I was just going to think about uh, the broadening out from text and allowing um, those other things. There were people doing kind of cartoons, amazing oil paintings, that it was very sensory. And then Dan and Stacey, I mean, I did have a look at your paper in the time of COVID. And and the thinking about how the nonverbal can help us when we're actually in the middle of something quite traumatic. So it felt very helpful
Yeah.
to allow those different forms of connection. I thought.
Well, I mean, I think, yeah, thanks, Melissa. I think, so Stacey and I are both performance studies scholars, and because of that, we are attuned to embodiment and creative practice as an embodied practice, which goes in some ways contrary um, to the traditional view of scholarship as being intellectual versus embodied work. Obviously, there are a lot of different fields, design, in other performance subdisciplines that are challenging that view, and research creation coming out of Canada, and indigenous epistemologies, and lots of different areas in which that's being challenged. But I guess for us, yeah, I guess performance studies has always acknowledged the ways, in performance autoethnography has always acknowledged the ways in which affect travels, not only and perhaps never in some senses by language, but by energetic exchange, proximity, heat, vibration. And I think that there is something interesting emerged that perhaps one day will, Annette and I will follow up once the 10,000 other things are off the mountain plate of the daily tasks. But I do think there was some interesting threads that emerged in the project that challenge this binary between digital or virtual and embodied. And of course, digital media scholars have been problematizing that for a long time, and trying to disrupt that binary of like online versus real world and so on and so forth. But I don't think, in my experience, that digital media scholars, or at least social media scholars, have very deeply or extensively yet really engaged with that long history of performance studies scholarship that talks about liveness, the old Peggy Phelan liveness debate, and the ways in which we are live online together as we were in this project, but quite differently than in proximity. And what does that mean? And so I guess one of the things to me that was interesting about the project was that we were drilling down into our embodied local, sometimes extremely local, like a room, existence, while at the same time having this really expansive engagement with perhaps larger or more extensive networks than we would normally. So I think for me, there was something really interesting in that. Yeah, I'll leave it there. But I think I saw that in a lot of the feedback, the projects, the artifacts that came out, and also the ways in which people talked about what those practices meant to them, which in many cases was a kind of mindfulness practice, which is what it was for me. And just to the cartoon comment, I guess I would just say that a lot of the prompts that I contributed, we both contributed various ones, obviously. A lot of the ones that I contributed came from kind of performance studies background. So, writing out, drawing outside the lines, or, do a body map, or do that, do the map of the heart, the map of the emotions. Like, all of that it comes from a history of embodiment scholarship and performance studies and performance ethnography.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Dan. And I mean, I'm interested in what you might have found that you weren't expecting, which you've mentioned, but I think it's a good moment maybe to talk to some of the people who were also involved. And I can think Tatjana's already spoken to us, and we've talked about how you you used the prompts, and you've written about how you used them. Let's say anything. Dawn, I met through the project. Sort of, yeah. And Dave and Sue, I think you've been on the project as well. Does anyone want to speak about their experiences?
I would like.
Oh,
Yep, go on. You go
Sorry.
first.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this was one of the best writing experiences I've ever had, and I really appreciate the way you frame it, because that was also my experience. That was necessary. There was no way out when you send the call out, and I read the call, and it was urgent. It was like the thing that I was waiting for, and where have you been all my life? Like this feeling, and even more in this isolation, in this crazy time of new demands and uncertainty for teaching and scholarship and so forth. So that the urgency, I remember, and also I remember that for the first time perhaps in my life, I got into a project without thinking, writing project without thinking outcome, because I'm very focused. I want to work smart, and all the fun things should be, have a target. And when you send the call, and I thought, I must be in this project, no matter what it comes out, I need this. I need this to survive. That was the motivation. And it has been such a ride. I mean, it's such a journey, and every day it was like Christmas Eve every night, every morning. Like, oh, what do we have? What's the, half awake in the toilet. It was like, what do we have today? What are we going to work with today? So Christmas Eve feeling. And then the prompts, they were great. They were just, mind blowing. I have so much material, that I'm slowly working and working out, and both like the therapeutic working out and also working out in writing, and genius, and it was, and I'm also have questions about the methodology. I'm very curious about it, and it affected me so much that when we finished the project, I was left, I want more. I want to explore more. So you don't know that, but I'm convinced a co-writer to get into a lab together with me. Yes. And I was describing, the 21 days, la la la, and I shared also the paper, the finished product that came out, the ethnography. And so we went into negotiations. What is best for us now? And so what we are doing at the moment is, since August, we have a weekly prompt that we send to each other, and we're two of us, and we write for, to, and against each other. So it's also challenges, like very, very respectful, but also like pushy, and the idea is to have it very creative. The idea is also to present these experiments at the ECQI. Let's see if we can manage, because time is ticking, and we're far away. So, but it's so this project created for me many how can I say, side effects, like yeah, survival through COVID, isolation, and a lot of creativity, a lot of new stuff going on. So thank you, really, and I'm curious about also, for instance, how did you design it? You know, how what were the considerations? How did you come to this specific design? How long did it take for you to negotiate that? And I think you damn brave to start these crazy projects. So yeah.
It was early in the pandemic compared to some of the other projects that we may have started since. I think it really initiated an energy into a space that was feeling very stuck. That was my experience of, like, let's get going.
Tatiana, like you, I mean, I'm so glad to hear that it was urgent and it was desperate for you, because it was desperate for me. And it was an urgent need to connect with other people who might be experiencing the same deluge of constant information, the continuous doom scrolling, the endless learning of new details of how to get in and out of a store, how to put on and off gloves, how to wear a mask, how to tighten and wear things properly. I mean, that kind of microscopic management of everyday life is happening at the same time that there's this massive and absolutely invisible virus that's everywhere and nowhere at once, and that there's a moment when it affects like literally the whole planet. And I knew, and for me it was urgent because I knew that there was never going to be another opportunity like this to bring together our voices to make sense of it. Like, it wasn't enough for me to just continue writing obsessively in my journal about it. I felt this urgent need to put it together and to kind of think about it on this broader scale and invite other people to participate in this telling of stories, because there were so many stories. Everyone was on my social media feeds, and of course, because I study digital media and I need to be on social media all the time, I was completely on every single type of social media you can imagine, and hearing narratives from a variety of different perspectives, from both, kind of everyday people like my mother, and also scholars who were immediately thinking about the kind of digital media aspects of it. So I'm really glad to hear that you're thinking about it as being urgent, because I think that was really what drove me to contact Dan and say, let's do this.
But also, I want to add to that beautiful picture that you're painting, and that because like it was like rolling lockdowns were hitting countries at different speeds and times and in different ways. And you yourself, and that were in my mind, you might have been through this before. I certainly never have. Quite an extreme situation. You were isolated. You, as you said in the opening, you packed up everything, ready to roll. Slam, the border got shut. You had gone somewhere not halfway here, but you'd gone out of your familiar place. And my memories of having meetings with Annette, where you would be in this like rental car or something, like, it was like complete snowy Scandinavian environment, and she would be like driving to a library or a cop so that she could get Wi-Fi. And this is really intense material embodiment. So not just this kind of like haunting of the invisible stalker, but it's like you are an extremis in a kind of way, in a kind of material way. So it was kind of like, and I think a lot of people found themselves in that, right? Like, so can you disengage from social media, whether you're a social media scholar or not? I mean, everybody was like, I can't look at this anymore because the doom scrolling is making me sleepless at night. But then if you don't, you're alone. So there was that kind of catch-22 thing, I think. And to me, your life at that moment really completely embodied that. So kudos to you for turning it into a social, if not a social movement, at least a social good.
Yeah.
But Dawn, do you want to say something, or are there other people who would like to talk? I agree with Annette. We could talk about so many aspects of this, but yeah, Dawn, over to you.
Yeah, just briefly. I was actually feeling really isolated because I'm immunosuppressed. So I had actually virtually isolated myself. So it was an opportunity for me to engage and to connect. At the same time, though, I found myself being completely overwhelmed by anxiety because I was worried about my daughter-in-law, who was a teacher with very young children, who was being forced to go to work. She works in an all-girls school in Western Sydney, which is, there's a lot of non-English speaking people that I was worried that, she may end up with the virus and then take it home. So I had all this catastrophizing going on as well. So my way of controlling that was to paint. And that was what I did each day through the 21 days, was to create a new layer in my painting, in my cold wax and oil painting, which eventually became part of the book chapter that I wrote as a consequence to this. So and it's my first solo book chapter as well too. So and with Melissa and I and another woman from New York made one of the videos as part of the project. So, hello, Melissa. Lovely to meet you face to face.
And of your presence and of knowing you since this project. And I just love seeing you in my Facebook. I feel like I really know you.
Yeah.
I've got your video here, actually, if you'd like to see it again.
Yeah,
it's only a minute and 7 seconds long.
I've just been cooking dinner while I've been doing this and listening on my ear headset. So it was a wonderful experience. What more can I say? Show the video, Anne.
Before we get started, for those of you who don't know about the videos, we did a one-day prompt called the Exquisite Corpse, and it runs like Exquisite Corpse would do, if you know that surrealist tradition. But one person
He doesn't. Some of the people don't know what that is.
So one person, well, Exquisite Corpse is where you would draw something on one sheet of a folded paper that's been folded many times, and then you would draw one line that goes around to another side of the paper, and then the other person gets it, but they only see the line and they don't see what you wrote, what you did, and then they do the drawing, and then they trace one of their lines or one or two lines around to the next fold and give it to the next person. Or you could go back and forth. And anyway, it creates this weird thing. And the surrealists used to do this all the time. Probably they were high on something. But there's this.
We also used to do it in Year 9 English and call them carry-on stories.
So So the Exquisite Corpse video, which was not invented by us, but was being done somewhere else, and then Mary Elizabeth, one of my colleagues, had heard about it, and she suggested that we do it as one of the prompts, and so we did it. Involved the first 4 people. The first person would create 19 words and send that to the second person. The second person would add images based on what they thought of the words and would send the words and the images to the third person, who would put it together in a video, and the fourth person would add sound, a soundtrack.
Mhm.
So that produced, through this sequence, a video that then the first, second, and third person would see. So it was only the fourth person, whoever saw it, and then would send it back to everybody else. And then that was the video that was produced. I don't know if you, Melissa and Dawn, edited yours afterwards, but I'm assuming that we're going to see an Exquisite Corpse.
Yeah, I think that's it's a compilation for one of the outputs that we put together, a performance salon in New York at Mark DeGarmo Dance Studio. And this, I've just teed it up to the beginning of your video, your Exquisite Corpse. And it says that it's 1 minute and 7 seconds long. And Exquisite Corpse, by the way, even though it was sort of pitched by the Surrealists, became later a very kind of staple of performance studies work, where they would make happenings and other kinds of performance through that means. So it was also welcome and exciting and familiar to me through that field. And I'm trying now to share. I think you can see.
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Oh, I didn't want to have. Yeah. So you can see the whole screen, right?
Just your web.
I'll make it big.
But now it's
How about
just,
that?
Looks
just
good.
the video, it's full screen.
I don't know how to get rid of our faces.
I don't know if we can, but we're pretty good.
Okay. Let's see if it'll run with the bandwidth we have.
We don't have any sound.
Sound.
You have to also.
Tatiana understands this Facebook thing about the sound.
Oh,
Zoom.
Sorry,
it's
what?
when you share the video, you should get some place where you can click share video.
Yeah.
Share audio, share sound.
Oh, you can't share the sound. Share that. And then so you can see the screen. Where's the share audio?
No, when you share, when you click share file, then you get the window, and at the bottom of the window there should be a place where you can tick share sound.
I think it's in advanced sharing options. When you click on share screen, the advanced sharing options.
No, it's basic.
Is it?
Yeah.
Advanced sharing.
It's at the bottom. Share sound.
Bottom left.
Bottom left.
Okay, let me try.
I love that everyone else is as technologically challenged.
Not Annette. Annette's good at it. No, this isn't working. Stop share. Okay, one more try. Try that. Share sound. Aha.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right. I saw it. Let me go back. Let's see if it works. I saw the button. I clicked the button.
Yes, thanks to television, that marvel of modern science, even our unfortunate friend and millions of other people can sit back in the comfort of their own homes and enjoy every thrill of the game.
Sure. Okay. All right.
Example, yeah.
Short but beautiful, as they all were.
And I guess
Thank
it's
you for your work.
making themselves these because of the exquisite quartz format. Certainly, I found the sensation was just to do something in this 24 hours that fits with what I've received. Again, it's not very conscious, it's not planned, that's not outcome focused.
I think that
How?
we live in a world where there's so much focus on outputs if you are an academic. And that's not the only place, but certainly that's the world I live in, so that's what I can speak to. And I think this was necessary to do, not so focused on outputs, because there was, then it could matter in different ways, I think. But at the same time, it was good to be able to have the idea of maybe some future outputs in mind, so that people could feel that maybe there was some sort of way that the energy could be corralled. I'm not going to say that people felt like maybe there was a carrot at the end or some sort of reward for participating, because that certainly wasn't what we had intended as a feeling. But I do think that the idea that there would be some way to corral the energy and push it out into the world really did help. And so that was another thing that we worked hard to produce, was connections that would allow us to have some viable outputs for people to have.
Yes, there's a tension between having viable outputs and the work being very much about the effective resonance and presence in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, I have some ambivalence about that, and I certainly was one part of the team that was driving for some kind of outputs. And I really, while I was listening to you, Annette, I was really thinking two things, two kind of axes around that. One is as a performance person, also as a drama teacher in the olden days. I've found that people really love an outcome or a showing, like it's quite hard to rehearse a play, for example, and keep it at the development level. Like almost always in theater, we would have like a developmental showing, even if it's in process. There's something about that, the energy and momentum of making public something that has been gestating, that's really important. And I guess when I came into teaching first in secondary schools and then in higher ed, I really have always hated and fought against the measurement aspect of it, because I do think outputs are important psychologically or energetically or, motivationally or whatever. But even in secondary schools, what constrains creativity is when you're going to be judged on that. And then all of a sudden there's a lot of production values and bells and whistles and anxiety and all of that. And you stop taking risks. So I don't think that the output in itself is kind of inherently constrictive. I think the sense of an output that counts is restrictive. But, and here's the other axis that I think intersects with that for me as a senior academic, I can afford to not care about that anymore on some level, not completely, of course, but I could do something like this and be like, you know what, this was my heart work for this 3 weeks. I'm not going to care about an output. But there were a lot of ECRs, and in fact, Annette and Mary Elizabeth students who came and participated. And, I think for people like that, they are they're not only learning, but they're also, as we found out since, increasingly precarious right now, post-COVID, and with the contractions in the university sector. And I think, I guess as a mentor, one of the things that I've always tried to say is, you don't have to choose between those things, but you kind of do have to do both of them. Otherwise, you're not going to end up being able to carve out time for the heart work. And so I guess I was mindful, as Annette and I were both senior scholars, to not impose maybe that career stage on these students and early career researchers who might very much want and need, like Tatiana was saying, for that labor. They've had an amazing experience. That's great, but that labor can go somewhere to tick 2 boxes maybe instead of 1.
I could happily get deeper into this, but I wanted to remind us that sort of partway through this project, Black Lives Matters kind of exploded, and a lot of people who were on the project seemed to be writing in going, I can't do this anymore, I need to go and be here. Do you want to tell us a bit about how that was from your angles, Dan and Annette?
Yeah, Annette, I think you should, because I feel, in some ways you actioned that more than I did. We talked about it a lot, but I feel like you made the intervention around that. Do you feel comfortable?
Yeah, I think that I wonder if I can tie this back to what you were saying, Dan, at some point, because I certainly came in with a different orientation about the idea of output, right? So I think that more than thinking about output, for me, I was coming at it from a very much a, kind of a Paulo Freire orientation of critical pedagogy, where the important part is asking the question and getting and sort of thinking about what are the better questions we could be asking, or what can, even just going there rather than getting even to the stage where development would turn into something that could be output, right? So just the exercise of doing it, and the maybe the dedication of doing it for 21 days was enough from my perspective. But you're right, that doesn't pay attention to the fact that some of the participants certainly would want to have some sort of, or need to have some sort of output. But one of the things that became really, I mean, around Black Lives Matter, it was very urgent to, for me, address it, not to stop doing the prompts, but to alter the prompts in either large or small ways, to think about how to make it part of the exercise. so that it didn't seem like we were ignoring it, because you couldn't ignore it, and because I was just heavily into the news of the United States and with friends who are who were really, really centered in that arena. So I think once we decided to go ahead and make that intervention, then then we were able to adjust some of the prompts and to say, well, maybe this isn't for everybody, but we're going to continue doing this. And also, I mean, Dan changed a prompt um, to be specifically around um, the protests. I think that it, in a way, it altered the community uh, in really significant ways at the moment. It felt it felt awkward to continue doing the prompts as if there was nothing else going on. It felt incredibly selfish and banal and naive to say the words "I can't breathe," even though many, like a lot of people ended up talking about breathing in the prompts. So there was a lot of talk about this kind of feeling trapped or feeling isolated and unable to, I mean, people would actually say that they couldn't breathe. And then it became quite ironic that this was, like a statement that a bunch of privileged academics or researchers who had time to do this thing, or even artists or activists, anybody who was participating in these 21 days, were fairly privileged and able to participate. They had access to the internet. They had so they had the leisure time. They weren't frontline workers usually, so it felt really awkward for a while to think about continuing it, but it did it actually yielded some really powerful pieces that have been published. So
Yeah.
so that was really I think that hearing people talk about it and giving voice to that was an important thing to do. To the extent that we could have done it more, yeah, I think we could have addressed it maybe a day earlier, but we were in different time zones, and I'm not sure that,
Mhm.
I mean, a day, now that it's a year later,
Yeah.
a day doesn't seem that big of a deal, but at the time, everything felt so present and visceral.
Immediate. Yeah. Yeah. Visceral. Yeah. I think, Annette, I just wanted to add to that, if it's okay. Um, One of the things I found interesting about the group was that, and Annette and Me and I grappled with this offline, and then within the larger group and so on, obviously as she's narrating, but also people responded differently. So there were some people in the group who brought their responses to that into the work that we were doing inside the group, and then there were other people who said, I'm out, I have to go march, I think this from memory, correct me if I'm wrong, Annette, but they were like, I have to be with my students right now, I have to be on the street right now, I have to, like, they had other spaces of response and resistance. And not that those are binarized, and we did talk about privilege and feeling really creepy that we were just a bunch of people sitting around being privileged on a page somewhere, while shit was really happening that needed direct action. But it made me think, and I had several conversations with group members in a range of ways about, how does one respond? Like the trial of Chauvin is now, right? How does one respond? Does one watch? Does one not watch? Does one go to the street? Does one not go to the street? Like all our spokes on the same wheel, and to provide a forum where people were discussing feeling powerless, or the efficacy of just sharing space, which is a social media concern or, you know, benefit. You know, is it enough? What's enough? Where is embodied? Is proximity required? Is public proximity? Is bodies gathering? You know, here in Australia, we had it recently with another sexual assault in Parliament case that went nowhere, and women all took to the street, and I was feeling very cynical about it. I didn't want to go to this march. I've been to every march, you know, for 55 years. Like, I believe in marching. But Stacy and my colleagues were like, okay, it's 12 o'clock, we're going down. And I was like, ugh. And I remember one of the women who organized the first women's march in Canberra in 1972 was on the news that night. I did go, by the way, saying, this is it. I've waited all my life. The revolution is here, you know? And I was like, the revolution's not here. Grow up. You know, I was so cynical. And I was sort of thinking, how many marches have we all been to? And it doesn't matter. And nothing changes. That's the space I was in. But I went mainly because my PhD students who I was with that day were going, well, we're going. Are you coming or not? And I was like, I'm coming. And we went down and we gathered in this park near Parliament. And I remember that proximity matters and how different it is to gather in bodies than even to gather like this. This is special in a different kind of way, but embodied proximity is really powerful, and it's powerful to see a big anthill of human beings going, I got off my couch because this is not acceptable, you know. So for me, that I can't breathe moment during our experiment really brought that out, like how people respond differently. None are more or less legitimate, but different.
Mm-hmm. Tatiana.
Yes, and about this, all of us questioned what was happening, and this is the best thing that such an experiment and playground and sandbox can do. You know, we were all the way through, and it's also for the COVID responses. We were all responding differently, but we were all responding. We were all engaged and questioning and asking the questions, and asking questions to the questions. You know.
Yes.
And also, I would like to add something to what you're saying about the output outcome. I come also for performance studies, and I think I have the same feeling as Dan. You know, output. I mean, actors without a performance at the end, they're not actors. You know, we work for it, and the process is influencing the product, and the process. You know, so. Yeah. And of course, it's very good that you remind us that you know, it's the measurement of the output. It's you know, what you do with the outcome, and we needed something to share, the showing, you know, the performative showing, and we did that timidly at the beginning on the social media. You know, is it allowed? Can we do these? And I loved how you responded, you know, like, we decide, you know, we make the rules. You know, what do you need? You make the rule. You remember, Melissa and Don, you know, and we really, really needed sometimes to share the things that were happening. Sometimes they were so big that we couldn't help it. And it was so important to receive a response, not, you know, the acknowledgement, oh, this is so good, oh, this is so pretty, but the acknowledgement that someone was taking it seriously and was taking your words, your colors, your shapes, and bringing into his, her, their experiences, you know, and that was powerful, and it was helping, you know, it was engaging creatively together. And I really feel strongly about the whole community, you know. I feel we were all together, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love everything you've said. I felt that as well, but I'm also mindful that some people had different experiences of it too. It, and Annette kind of gestured toward this earlier in her remarks, that some people didn't want to engage in Facebook. They're you know, it's political and personal and so on. But Annette, I'm wondering if you can explain, because the people. So we had a listserv, we had an email group of people who didn't want to engage, or maybe there was an everyone. Maybe Annette, you can talk about it. You can see my ineptitude here, but one of the things was that we were really committed to, and that helped me understand, it's important to make different platforms for people who experience the world differently and want to share and interact differently. And to me, I was just like, oh, well, Facebook, who cares? It's a corporate structural disgustingness. It doesn't matter. We can share visuals and language shares, you know. But some people were like, it's my position. I don't ever share on Facebook or other, you know, corporate platforms and so on. But and I respect that. But then the challenge became, how do we share? Because it's like almost having a, maybe in our language, Tatiana, like a different kind of theater. It's like having a happening versus a small 4-person theater, where, you know, the sharing, the nature of the sharing was different. The responses qualitatively and quantitatively were different. And so my memory is that we struggled to figure out, well, okay, for those people on email, how do we still have that interactive experience that's kind of built into the structure of Facebook, where someone posts something like Dawn, who is posting, I think, your paintings every day that were evolving, the layers and layers, and everybody's like, oh my God. And the next day it was like, oh my God, more, you know, because we could see it in the way that Facebook is built. We can see it and interact with it in a certain way. And I felt that we struggled with that. As time went on, it became harder to keep the email community, I don't know, as interactive with one another as the social media community were.
Well, from my perspective, well, there are a couple things going on. First is there's not just a politic around Facebook, but the interface that is complicated, that I think I do want to just mention some things about, because I think it's really interesting. But around the mailing list, it reminds me that the goal for many people might have been to share and to perform and to be engaged in a lot of interaction, but that wasn't necessarily how everybody wanted to experience this event. It wasn't intended. It was asynchronous, and it also was not framed as needing to be interactive. It was autoethnographic, so it was meant to be self-reflexive about how one's own experience of a pandemic could help us understand it at global or macro scales and micro scales. So there was this kind of idea that it was a self-exploration, and that it became so interactive and powerfully community oriented for some people is, I think, one of the most, it's a wonderful outcome of it. So there are a lot of people who did not share at that same degree, but still did the prompts. And we don't know so much about them because they weren't interactive in the same way. So those people who bubble to the top, or you know, like have a lot to say about it, are those people who say a lot. or are, like have some, who have that tendency or desire to share. But there's an important feature of community that is about listening and observing from the side and doing that bit of what we call lurking, which Kate Crawford would, who's a sociologist out of Australia working in New York now, would talk about as lurking, as listening. So she really talks a lot about the important aspect in community of being the person to maybe like but not speak, the person who's there being a part of the community but not visibly there, but takes a lot from it. So there was a lot going on in the background. Now, having said that, because Facebook was, so every day we had to post, right? And we had to make sure that we were also doing enough responding to make sure that we were kind of paying attention. So like all of us were, well, I guess it was just you and me, Dan, who were doing the prompts during those 21 days. So ME she wasn't doing any of the prompting. So it was just every other day, Dan and I were switching back and forth. So we had to be kind of on duty for Facebook. And it was hard enough to do it on Facebook and then post also on email. So going to the next step to inculcate a community orientation in a mailing list is we just didn't go there. So there might have been a different form of community building had we spent more energy in that direction, but we couldn't. It just wasn't possible with the number of hours of attention we had. We were also struggling with our own sense of weirdness around time. So so it was a very stressful time to manage the 21 days. It was exhausting, really. Now, I have to just say something about Facebook and why I think it is such a problematic platform. So I don't know if you noticed this, Dan, or any of the others who were there, but Dan and I should have seen all of the posts because we were there all the time. But I can guarantee you that Dan and I did not see all the posts, right? And it is extremely difficult to control or to try to influence the way that the algorithm functions on Facebook to feed only certain news through. So certain posts would rise to the top based on what we think might, like maybe it's perceived as more relevant because maybe it's got more hearts on it, or maybe it used certain words and that brings it to the top, right? Or maybe it has an image that will always bring something to the top, or it will bring it higher in the feed than something without an image. So there are lots of ways in which Facebook had control over what the group saw in ways that we could not control and in ways that were not predictable. And so when now I go back and look for things and I run across a post I never saw that I never commented on because I never saw it, and now I give a comment like almost a year later. And then I get a response back from somebody like, "Oh, you saw it finally." And what's interesting is that the community of all the people who are there, also, which is unpredictable of knowing how many people are actually active on the Facebook page. So we assume there were about 90 who were pretty decently active, but there was probably a lot fewer who were active. But of those people who are active, a lot of them would assume that because Dan and I are facilitating, we're going to be paying attention to them. And if they don't get a response, then it's as if they don't exist, or as if they didn't do something well. And they might also see other people who get a lot of hearts or likes, and that we, you know, and it isn't a deliberate, it's not a deliberate decision on our part, but it will have potentially an impact and a consequence. And when you're talking about sensitive topics, or when we're in this time that we could generally say is traumatic for people and very intense, the challenge of Facebook remained, and it bothers me still, you know, even as much as it fostered so many wonderful things. It bothers me still that people will have dropped away or not gotten responded to, in ways that we don't yet know or cannot even understand. That's the thing I don't like about Facebook, in more than the politic of it, um, you know, keeping information and selling data and all of the other stuff that makes it problematic. But mostly it's that it's an uncontrollable algorithm. And if, well, I'll stop there because I think that other people might have something to say about that.
Are relating. Yeah, I'm thinking about that, but I'm also wondering about your proposal for 2.0 for reigniting this project this year, and I wonder what you have in mind, because we're speaking
Okay,
tense,
yeah.
but in it, yeah.
Well, and it should have happened a month ago or
Okay.
more. It should have happened 2 months ago. But it, you know, like I don't have very much time. But what I want to do, and I'd love your feedback on this idea. I think that I would like to encourage people to do various things, but from my perspective, what I think I want to do is a 5-day prompt series where we go back in time to look at some artifact from a year ago on that day. So go a year ago on that day. Here are the words that I used or saw in my posts, in my email, or in the news. And then think about it, either through, you know, another cold wax painting, or you know, through writing or drawing. So to reflect on what happened 1 year ago today, just for 5 days. And for me, that's important to do. Now, and what I want to do is I want to do it on Miro, which is a collaborative platform that ends up looking a lot like, if you've ever used the presentation software called Prezi. Do you know what Prezi is? Well, anyway, okay, so let me describe it differently. It's like a giant whiteboard that's huge. It ends up looking like like a landscape. And and then you can move around this landscape and zoom in on a single, frame, within which somebody could have a ton of little post-it notes and or drawings or sketches, so people can post things there, and then other people can draw lines between what one person did and somebody else's stuff, so people can draw lines between ideas, but everybody's stuff is on the same board, so to speak. It's called Miro board.
Mhm.
And it's a collaboration used in design studies, and it's meant for doing, brainstorming with, post-it
Lots of
notes.
virtual post-it notes.
But it also allows you to do video chat, and it allows you to post in images, and it allows you to do in texts. So it becomes a way for people to share, and you lose the comment, like you lose the heart and comment ability, and you lose the other feature of Facebook, which is the push notification, where people, like it becomes an app that you look at because it's got a red dot on your screen, so it notifies you that there's something there, or you had like 13 people liked something, so you pay attention to it. So it requires people to actually go there to look at it. But if it's only for 5 days, I think it would work. Anyway, that's one thing that I want to do as a 2.0.
Sounds much more egalitarian as a platform, and less exploitative of our serotonin addictions as well, even as
Right.
individuals, and really the thinking around how the platforms constrain our communication and our connection is really interesting. As certainly coming from not working within digital studies, I've suddenly become so much more aware of how even these rectangular boxes create, the influence the ways that we are able to relate to each other. So that sounds really good, this new platform.
Yeah, so that's an idea for one thing to do, and I think that that if I kick off a 5 days, 5 prompts, 5 memories of 1 year ago, that might help other people think about what they might want to do and help other people kick off some other things.
Okay.
I'm trying to think about, we're also doing we've also collected, I will say we've collected all of the posts and all of the images and all of the videos and all of the emails, and we have a huge archive of everything. And what we're doing now is taking away all of the material that has, where people haven't responded to say they would let us use it. So we're just cutting away all the pieces that are not being allowed. And then what we want to do is kind of open that archive up because it's extraordinary.
Mm-hmm.
And to sort of think about what does this speak to? What happened? How does, are there certain kinds of patterns of images and ways of thinking that could be interesting for us to think about?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not suggesting that we, and see, I'm very non-product oriented in this way. Like I don't think there needs to be I think that we did it is good enough. But if people wanted to analyze what happened in this as a process of collaboration, of community building, of using Facebook, of thinking about the connection between the massive and the micro, and or narrative themes around the pandemic or isolation and lockdowns, and or the idea of masks, or Black Lives Matter. This is a really great archive of materials, and people who, and about 75 people, well, maybe 80 by now, have said they are happy to have us use any of their information. So it's a beautiful archive of material that can be used, and so that's been all collated and it's all
So
ready.
opportunity for us to reflect together collaboratively this year.
Yeah, and I think that, like I'd be sad if, like if you performance studies people on the screen here didn't sort of say, what's the interesting research question here that's emerging from this? And or what, like what are some performative moments that are worth highlighting and thinking about?
I just want to say, I mean, we're over time, but I do just want to say to that, like, I'm interested in listening to this exchange between you, Melissa, and Annette, because I think in some ways, Annette, what you're describing is an output. It's a different kind of output than we're talking about. And I've noticed over time, like I'm still grappling with the book. We did a special issue, as most of you know. It came out very quickly, as QI was doing during COVID. Everything was open access. Everything was rapid because ICQI hadn't occurred. And so they were, yeah, let's do it. And it came out very quickly. And then a bunch of the contributors put together, the participants put together a book that I've sent to a friend, Series and Springer, and it's just gone on and on. And it's like excruciating, and it's not progressing because COVID, in that sense, slowed everything down. So temporality is of issue here and of interest to me. But at the same time, Annette and Mary Elizabeth have started going, you know, massive micro 2.0, and I'm like, no, I can't do it. I don't have bandwidth for it. I'm maxed out. And unless you have, I have students, but unless you have students who can do that labor, or in this case, I guess, was Emmy your student, Annette, or she was at least your junior colleague, and she was doing a lot of that labor. And yeah, and you guys were co-teaching a class, I think, in Canada. So it was this beautiful kind of global tiered investment of labor and perspective. But I guess I'm listening, and as I was feeling when we've been corresponding, I'm like, I'm sort of on to the next thing. And in a way, that's kind of ironic because if I'm the guy who was like, we need outputs for the junior scholars, you know, we need Q1 outputs, in fact, you know, and all that kind of crap. And Annette, and I always have this debate, you know, like, fuck Q1, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, you can say fuck Q1 when you're a professor, but not when you're like a PhD student or a first year out, you know? So we always have these debates, don't we, Annette? But I was like, but I'm listening to you and I'm like, that was then and this is now. My world is different. I loved this project. And I think in some way I'm laughing because that is a completely performance perspective on things. It was an event, and the event was profound for me, but the event is over. And so in some sense, even though I agree with you that the archive is stunning, I mean, the work was so mind-blowing, there's a part of me that's not really interested in the work because the work was when we were together. And we can be together again, like 2.0, but it's going to be different. And I guess for me, the passion for me was in that 21 days and just after, where we're all like, I'm not alone, you know? So I'm very moved by and interested in the differences here around. But you are talking about outputs. I just want to flag that. An archive is an output, is a living remnant.
Reflective space and integrating and making some space. Great, what was that? But I'm going to have to pull the plug. Really, really enjoyable hearing from you about this, and I guess we will await notification if there's more. So thank you.
Indeed.
Really great.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
You. Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Melissa. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.